Hello, Angus here, personal trainer and metabolic health coach. And I'm going to do a quick summary review of Diary of a CEO interviewing Phil Spector that came out at the beginning of this year, 2023. Phil Spector is a professor and he runs a thing called the Soy Study. So the podcast kind of starts off with an intro about Tim, why he got into it. He used to do epigenetics. I should probably give my overall kind of impression and thought. And I'll put this at the beginning of the video rather than at the end of the video. Anytime you're listening or watching a podcast, you need to view it through your own lens and realize that the people in the podcast or video are viewing it through their lens. So Tim, I keep calling him Phil for some reason, Tim Spector has this view of he had a stroke and he was ill. So he's looking for health, not ripped abs, not particularly, doesn't really need to lose weight, where you might be coming from another spectrum of not being very fit or not having fitness in your life. Maybe Tim goes out for 3 runs a week and he doesn't think of that as exercise, but that's way more than you do. Or he might not particularly have a sweet tooth, and yes, he might have cured himself with the Zoe study, where he's now looking at food and he's having his high fat Greek yogurt in the morning, which is full of protein and full of fat that keeps his blood sugar nice and stable going all the way through the day. And you might not be at that point yet in your diet, or you might not be on a professor's salaries with a couple of side gigs. You might not have that kind of money to invest. So I would say one place to start is to look at calories first, to see how much calories you're getting in. After seeing about 1,000 food diaries, most people eat very little sliver of protein, loads of fat, loads of carbs. You need to turn that kind of on its head. Blood sugar goes crazy, yes, but blood sugar goes crazy, which causes you to dip, which causes you to eat an entire box of custard creams. If you're drinking a liter of Coca-Cola per day, switch it to diet, then switch it to water. Lots of people just can't switch to water straight away. I would love you just to eat 90% of your food from 80% of your food from vegetables, bunch of lean, good quality, organic, grass-fed meat every day, and only drink water with occasional bits of electrolyte in it, and never ever have sugar, never ever have wheat, just purely because it's overly processed, not because of the gluten. I would love most people to do that. You're just not going to do it because you live in the real world. So Tim Spector maybe doesn't live in the real world, maybe he does. So the overarching thing in this is he's going on about food quality over calories, and it's sort of like, hey, let's take calories and just put them in the bin. They're absolute bullshit. In fact, the thumbnail in this has got some sort of like calories are a lie. Calories clearly aren't a lie. Calories are just a unit of energy. It's like I'll say to people is, if I have a 10 centimeter long rod and I put it in the sand and only 5 centimeters are sticking out, we can still measure that. That doesn't change the length of the rod. It depends on the environment you put that rod. When you put calories in your body, they can express in different ways. So it's not a perfect 2,000 goes in, 2,000 comes out. We're always burning energy. So energy is a unit of energy from the sun, and like this Lego brick. This Lego brick is not the calorie. The calorie is invisible. The join here, that's the calorie. When I break that apart, that noise is a release of energy. That sound was a release of energy. That is a calorie. These are the carbon that we breathe out. We breathe out carbon that's attached to energy, and carbon is in the food. So calories exist, and calories are a unit of energy. But do I agree with Phil Spencer on food quality? Yes, food quality really matters. It will change how that food expresses in your body, how you release that energy, and how you tap into that energy. If you have too much body fat, you technically have a lot of calories on your body. And if you're tired and have a lot of body fat, there seems to be a mechanism broken inside your body that you can't release that energy. So Tim Spector is fully into sort of food quality. Then he goes on to Stephen Bartlett, asks him about fasting, and Tim Spector he's pretty big on fasting, and he's sort of like it's magic. But if you're eating that much throughout the day, then you shorten it to this, you're gonna consume less energy. So despite the fact that wonderful things like autophagy might be happening, which also happens when you do exercise, you're more often than not reducing the amount of calories you're coming in. And I've done lots of whole food diets, lots of fasting. When I count my calories, when I lose weight or when I lose fat, it's always because there's a reduction in the calories. Does it mean you have to count calories? No, but it means calories still count. So he's saying fasting is good because it gives your digestive system a rest. I totally agree with that. I think a 12-hour fast for most people is where you should start. And if you can fast longer, it's a sign of good metabolic flexibility, which is good. Stephen Bartlett asked him about vitamins. He basically says they're shit. You don't need vitamins in your life. I would, for the most part, agree with that. If you're eating a really diverse diet, you probably don't need vitamins. Could you take a multivitamin as an overarching thing? Vitamin D is completely separate in the world of vitamins. You should really be taking vitamin D because you are no longer getting it from the sun at this time of year, hence the darkness in here. So taking vitamin D is a useful thing. Then Stephen Bartlett says, hey, I did a keto diet, I lost weight on the keto diet, but I can't sustain it. And Tim just sort of shakes his head. Yeah, the keto diet's pretty much nonsense in Tim's point of view, other than the fact that you might be removing, you go from like a standard American diet that we always talk about, or this Western junk food diet of like 80+% processed foods, and then you suddenly eat meat, butter, and vegetables, and you feel better. Those things are whole foods, more nutritionally dense and better for you. It wasn't that keto was amazing, it's that you removed all this junk from your diet. That I would agree with as well. He asks about artificial sweeteners. Tim Spector shakes his head, really, really bad. Apart from dentists will like you because you're no longer consuming sugar. He's saying that if you have 300 calories of artificial sweeteners or 300 calories of actual sugary sweetener drinks and you switch to artificial sweeteners, you should have a 300 calorie, you should then produce a 300 calorie deficit, which doesn't happen. Again, it doesn't really happen like that. You might have a 300 calorie tin of juice and that might do you for lunch. And then when you have an artificial swing, you get hungry because your metabolism controls your energy in, energy out. So just because you reduce 300 calories from artificial or from sweeteners doesn't mean that that's necessarily going to mean that you're now in a 300 calorie deficit if you go have a sandwich instead. The artificial sweetener thing is hotly debated by your sort of whole food people and your calories in, calories out people. There is evidence on both sides. Sugared beverages are terrible for you, and if you have to move to the diet version to wean yourself off, you should go for that. One thing that I will say is if you have a sweetened beverage, like say a Pepsi Max, which has got artificial sweeteners in it, you are still getting that sweet taste in your mouth, which isn't really desensitizing yourself to that sweet taste. You want to kind of lower that sweet taste so blueberries taste sweet again. If you're having an artificially sweet thing, you're going to need that sweet taste in the future going onwards. And Tim Spector then says that, it's the food industry is funding these studies that are saying calories are bad, and it's the, like Coca-Cola sponsors Olympics. I totally agree with that. I think that stuff's sort of bullshit. But then he also goes on to say coffee is amazing because there's lots of studies to say coffee is amazing. Who do you think's funding those studies? The coffee industry. So we're meant to believe the coffee industry, but we're not meant to believe the exercise food industry like Nestle, because they just want us to be fat. But the coffee industry is amazing. I think a lot of studies can be completely and utterly misleading, which doesn't really help, and maybe we should look in for a little bit of internal intuition when we're doing our stuff. Does that make sense? Does this not make sense? Stephen Bartlett asked him about gluten intolerance, and he says most gluten intolerance is absolute nonsense. It's not really the gluten that's doing you bother. You go to Tesco and you grab a cheap sandwich and then you feel awful afterwards. It's because you get a blood sugar spike because especially wheat flour is highly processed. It acts like sugar in the body. You get this blood sugar spike, and then you get this dip below baseline. So you feel maybe 3 hours later, you get this dip in blood sugar, which makes you tired and hangry. And by cutting out gluten, you cut out that bread and you switch that for salad, and you suddenly notice your energy is a lot more stable. So Tim Spector in his soy studies got continuous blood glucose monitors and some gut micro tests. Keeping your blood sugar as stable as possible. I totally recommend the Glucose Goddess book, Glucose Revolution, to kind of see about that. But again, if you knock it up and down a little bit, not the end of the world. And this continues to gut and mood, where they do fecal transplants into mice. So they get these sterile mice that don't really have any gut bacteria, and they put anxious mice's poo inside their bellies, and then these mice become anxious as well, because your gut makes your serotonin, and then your gut makes a lot of your neurotransmitters, which really does control your mood, which can potentially control your appetite. So I'm not saying that gut doesn't play an important role. I definitely think gut plays an important role, but your gut can cause you to overeat, or your gut can cause you to undermove. There's always this energy balance at play. That doesn't mean that tracking that energy is what's vital to you for you to make success in fat loss. The next big controversial thing he says that I totally agree with is exercise doesn't work for fat loss. If there's something I've been spouting for a while, and in my new kind of workout program, I have a bit in it, which is, say after me, exercise doesn't burn calories, exercise creates adaptions. So when you're exercising, you're looking to create an adaptation. You do zone 2 cardio to make your mitochondria more efficient at burning fat. Burning fat isn't the same as losing fat. If I burn 50 grams of fat and eat 50 grams of fat, I've just replaced that, okay? So your mitochondria has a little hole. This is the fat cell here, has a little hole. With zone 2 exercise, you make that hole bigger. That means you can produce more energy and more power from fat as a fuel source, rather than having to rely on carbohydrates as a fuel source, which will help stabilize some of your movements. There's stuff happening in your mitochondria rather than just your gut microbiome. The other thing is you lift weights to make your muscles larger, so you have more space to put glucose and require more glucose in those muscles, because those muscles can produce more work. If you do a set of bench press at 50 kilos and that's the best you can do, you will burn X amount of energy. If you double that to 100 kilos, you will burn so much more energy, because it requires so much more work to move that heavier load. So it's relevant to the person. It's 100% of their effort. The 50 kilo person and the 100 kilo person, still 100% of their effort, but they can do more. So that's why you exercise. To build your lean mass, become stronger, your lean mass will increase. Zone 2 exercise to improve that efficiency, and also you can do exercise to improve your mood. There's hundreds of reasons to exercise. Weight loss just isn't one of them, or fat loss just isn't one of them. The other thing that happens with exercise that he didn't really get into is, say this is how much exercise, this is how much calories you burn through activity, NEAT or exercise. It doesn't matter where your exercise is. If you do more exercise, your NEAT will decrease. And the average over a week will completely and utterly be the same for the most part. So exercise isn't useful for that. However, the other thing he doesn't say is it doesn't work for fat loss, but exercise is essential at keeping the weight off. People who keep the weight off long term always have exercise habits in place. It's one of the key fundamentals that separates the people. So in the weight loss, we don't have a problem in losing weight. We have a problem in keeping the weight off, and exercise is one of the key components of keeping your weight off. Quick side tangent on exercise. Fitter people will have a higher calorie expenditure. They will use more fuel because they are fit. If you run a marathon every single day, you're going to use way more fuel than someone who doesn't, even though your NEAT will compensate and will down, but your net energy expenditure for the day will be higher. What fitness really matters is, or you should concern yourself about, is how well can you recover from your bout with fitness. If you do a marathon on Monday and you can't walk for a whole week, yes, your NEAT for the rest of the week will make that week. Activity as part of your total energy expenditure will shrink to nothing. But if you run a marathon every day, your calorie expenditure will be 3 times the amount of the person who ran the marathon on the Monday and can't recover. So exercise and building up fitness over time will be net positive, but you can always re-eat, or it's way easier to re-eat. You can eat, 2 Wispas, and that's your spin class completely ruined. You're now in a surplus. So that's well worth considering. But if you do the spin class and eat Tim Spector's diet, awesome. If you go for your 10,000 steps per day and eat Tim Spector's diet, you will lose weight because you're eating majority whole foods, which are low in calories. So again, exercise is about creating an adaptation. I'm also going to put a link in the description here for James Smith. He had an interesting take on this podcast, and it was just a reel on Instagram. So I'll link that below. I thought that was an interesting take in tracking calories. Overall, really like this podcast. I think it was good. Yes, you should really be emphasizing food quality. Food quality is something you're going to have to really think about and have in. If you are tracking calories overall, you can make a cinnamon bun fit your diet without going haywire. Tim seems to be very keen on, I can't have a banana because it spikes my blood sugar. you know, maybe you want to spike your blood sugar before workout. Is a banana before bed for Tim worth it? And he's also come from this medical school background where he had cereal and orange juice. We're all past that stage where we know that that just spikes your blood sugar and you dip a little bit after, and then you have to have a donut, and then you have to go through. So I think some of the things that Tim is mind-blowing for Tim. I think a lot of us in the fitness community already know some of these things. Anyway, that's my overall view of this podcast. Well worth checking out. Really like Diary of a CEO, as I said, and that's my overall thing. Love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll check you guys in the next one.